This program was first broadcast on Canterbury's access media station, Plains FM, and was made with the assistance of New Zealand On Air.
Hello everybody, and welcome to God is Not Absent, a podcast in which we share stories of faith in the lives of New Zealanders today. This podcast is hosted by me, Apurva Patel-Kana, a young woman who has embarked on her own journey with God and is incredibly curious to know if God really is as dead or absent as many Westerners seem to think. I'm hoping that through this podcast we'll see how vibrant and how real God really is. Because if God really is not absent, well then, that changes everything. Well, hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of God is Not Absent. This week we have Sophie Craw joining us. Hello, Sophie.
Hi, Apurva.
So I know Sophie because she is my front door neighbour.
Next door neighbour.
Next door neighbour. I like to say front because we live in two flats and she's in the front one. But yeah, it's been really cool getting to know you, Sophie. Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Oh, why not? I'm Sophie. I'm 19. I'm from Nelson, but I was born in Christchurch. So I've just moved, last year I moved back to Christchurch for university, where I'm studying English and history. I don't know where it's going.
Oh my gosh, that is every uni student's life.
Yep.
That is my life. I don't know what I'm going to be doing, but it's okay. It's okay. Shall we get right into it?
Yes.
Awesome. So I guess my first question is the question I ask everyone. When did you first encounter Jesus in a personal way?
So I grew up in a Christian household, went to Christian primary schools, went to a Christian kindergarten. So God was always in my life, and it wasn't like I didn't have any form of relationship with him. But the time where I kind of started taking it into my own hands was like around intermediate age. And one of the first times I ever remember like feeling his actual, like God's presence was in a time of worship at intermediate. It was just like at school, and we were watching YouTube videos of worship music, and Oceans was on. And,
oh my goodness, Oceans.
Yeah. And it was the first time I ever felt his kind of like physical presence on me. And I felt like this weight in my hands. And I was like, whoa, I've never felt this before. And so that's kind of what I look back to as kind of the beginning of my personal journey with God, really. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of Christians that have grown up in the church, surrounded by Christians and their family's Christian and everything like that, they kind of believe that they don't have a valid story. But I think what's really cool about the beginning of your story is you were so lucky to have grown up in a Christian environment and have known God's love right from the start.
Definitely. It's definitely something I kind of realized as I grew up, that it was actually the ideal way that I was lucky enough to grow up in a house with people who love Jesus. He didn't find me when I was at my worst or anything. Yeah.
So you had that personal encounter with God. What led you to saying yes to Jesus fully? I want to follow you for the rest of my life.
That is really funny. And when I got this question, I was like, oh my gosh, how do I even, why do I actually follow Jesus? I couldn't even really remember the moment or the reasoning why. I remember being a kid and saying that prayer, God forgive me of my sins, let me go to heaven, every night, because I was fearful about my salvation, and that if I died the next day and I hadn't been repented for my sins, that I would be going to hell.
Oh my gosh, that sounds...
It's a bit weighty.
Yeah.
But for me, it was kind of as a young teen where it was I struggled a lot with anxiety in the beginning of high school, so year 9, year 10, and this is just one moment I kind of thought of that kind of explained the reason why I follow Jesus was I was at a youth camp. It was like the last night. We were having this big worship night. I was feeling the Lord's Spirit, and we got told to put all of like the thing that we'd been feeling on our heart into a marble. They had given us marbles, and the thing I had been struggling with was my anxiety. And so I decided that day that I wasn't going to let anxiety control my life anymore, and that my anxiety often stemmed from not knowing my future, not knowing where I was going to go, and being able to give my anxiety to him. And that marble was like kind of the picture of why I follow him. The first reason I followed him was that if I follow him, I get to live a life where I don't have to worry about anything, and that he has mapped out every single day of my life. And why would I choose to live life by my own anxious ways if I could be with him? So I don't know if that's really exactly like the reason why I decided to follow Jesus, but I think that at the beginning of my faith, that was really the driving force of why I wanted to follow him. Yeah.
Is it still the driving force?
I think it still is. But in a more maturing way, because obviously I'm not that 14-year-old girl who put that anxiety in the marble anymore. There are different challenges that I encounter. But I still think having the peace that God has my life in his hands is still the driving force of me being with him. Yeah.
So I guess going back to your first encounter with God, where you felt God's presence so tangibly, I was wondering, how do you think you and God interact with each other most often?
I think that most often, I guess, is in my constant internal monologue with the Lord every single day. I guess it's prayer, but I don't think I would ordinarily call it prayer. It's usually just whispering under my breath conversations with him, or praying out loud in the car, or just thinking thoughts that I know are going directly to him, kind of a conversation with somebody in my brain that is God. And then a time that I feel the most connected with him is through worship, but then also through journaling. I really like to journal, especially when I'm having a difficult time praying to God aloud. I like to just be able to write out my prayers in the form of a journal.
That is me as well.
Yeah, I don't know why that is, but I've always found it really easy to write down my internal monologue and put it on the paper. It's not necessarily beautiful or anything, which is actually what I really enjoy about journaling.
Yeah, I think for me, I found it really hard talking out loud because it just felt really cheesy.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It's like, I can't believe I'm saying this out loud.
And it's like, what if somebody hears me?
Yeah.
And then I guess there's the like, oh no, what if someone reads my journal?
Yeah.
But I don't know. There's an element of trust with what you write down. I also quite like it because it forces me to think really deeply about what I'm going through and actually formulate my thoughts out of the chaos, because I have to put it down in words. Yeah.
So throughout your life, you have such a strong relationship with God, and you know that he's present. And I was wondering, what are some of the biggest ways that God has worked in your life?
Wow, that's an intense question.
Sorry.
That's okay. I think kind of going back to I feel like everything goes back to that initial place of anxiety, which is funny because I wouldn't say that anxiety is something that I struggle as deeply with now, but I have been through a lot of moves and changes in my life. So like the biggest one was after the Christchurch earthquakes, we moved to Nelson, where I lived the next 10 years of my life. And in that time, it was real. Like I didn't really have the relationship with God that I have now, but he kind of laid stones that I would end up going back to in hindsight, where I could see every point where God had answered the thing that I was worried about, or provided me with the person. Like, my number one thing, because I was old enough to really be impacted by moving at 10 years old. I was worried that I wouldn't have any friends.
Yeah.
And the first day of school, I had actually met my best friend like a couple months before. I didn't know that she was going to end up going to my school or anything. But I met her on the very first day of my new primary school, and we've been best friends for 10 years.
Oh, that's awesome.
It is gorgeous. But that is one of the things I go back to remind myself that he was present, and he knew my deepest thoughts and desires even before I had expressed them to anybody. And so once again in my life now, when I've moved back to Christchurch, it's really been the crutch that I've had to lean on, is knowing that even when I'm feeling my most alone and the most lost I've ever felt in my life, that he had seen that he like knows my heart, he knows what I want, and he's not just going to leave me in the lurch. And even if it's not the way that I thought it was going to unfold, his plan is much better than my plan. 100%.
Totally.
Yeah.
So I guess, like, in terms of your faith throughout the years, how do you think it's matured, and how do you think your understanding of God has changed?
I think that one of the biggest things was really realizing that God can actually be my friend, and he's not just some lofty voice in the sky that I can't have a relationship with. And I think that that's a word we toss around a lot in kind of the Christian community, is relationship. But I don't think I ever actually really understood what it meant until I really needed God in a personal way, because as a child I always had people praying for me, always had other people to kind of do the hard yards for me. And because I wasn't really aware of the stuff that was going around in my world, so I was like just a happy little kid. But I think now in my move and my like maturing in adulthood, it's really been actually initiating that relationship with him and knowing that he isn't just some voice in the sky, and he wants to talk to me. And so I guess the place where I've matured is actually going after him for myself and not letting other people just present him to me, like in children's church when you would be directed in a lesson about like, this is what we're learning about this week, we're learning about Noah's Ark, or like in youth group where they would be sermons about about common things that all teenagers struggle with, and you'd like listen to it and it'd be like, oh yeah, that's me. But the way that I've matured is actually really actually recognizing I'm struggling with something, and actually recognizing I don't have to struggle with that, and if I go through it with God, then I can find the answers, find the healing, find whatever I need at the time. But obviously it's not as easy as it sounds. I still struggle with it all the time. But
no, I think that's really important. And when I learned that God is always there listening to me, it just completely changed my life, and it was so comforting to know that. So Sophie, one of the biggest changes in your life has been to move from Nelson to Christchurch. I was wondering, what has that been like, and how has God impacted the highs and lows of this experience?
He's really like been the only thing that was with me in all those highs and lows. Moving away from Nelson I knew it was going to be a really hard thing for me, because I absolutely loved my life. I'm a real homebody, and I don't hate my family, and I love my parents. I love my sisters. I would have happily stayed at home for years if I didn't love school. Needed to go to university. There wasn't really anything for me in Nelson, and so it was a really difficult time, and I had pre-homesickness for months before I made the move. I would cry about it all the time because I knew exactly how much it was going to impact me, and I knew I mean, I ended up being harder than I anticipated, but I knew exactly how it was going to impact me. And even though I was moving to a city where I had extended family, my boyfriend was moving with me, it was going to be great. But I still never could have anticipated what my life was going to be like. I thought it was going to take ages for me to make proper friends and ages to get planted in a church. Those were the things I knew that I needed from the get-go. And so as soon as I moved, the very first Sunday, I think I got there on a Friday, and that Sunday I was at church. Ended up being the church that I stayed at, which was amazing. Yeah. We went there when I was a kid for a couple months, and then we moved to Nelson. So I was like, I'll just go back to the last church I was at. And it was exactly what I needed. And I was initially thinking I was just going to church hop and test the waters and stuff, but as soon as I went to my church, I was like, no, this is where I need to be. I can grow here. There are young people here. And I really saw kind of like the potential for those friendships that I really wanted to grow, which is funny because that's not where they ended up growing from. Yeah. But, so in the time, basically all of last year was a nightmare. I felt so alone all the time. In Nelson, I had kind of like a whole ecosystem of people around me. I was very involved in church. Obviously, high school is a full-time job in itself. I was used to living with sisters and family who were always kind of up in your business, and then suddenly I was just like in a dorm room by myself night after night. And it was really, really hard. I had lots of crying times and homesickness times, and when I would go home I would stay for the full break, and then I'd come back to Christchurch and I would be absolutely wrecked, which is why this year I've chosen not to do that. I've tried to make Christchurch my home, but I should probably bring God back into the conversation instead of talking about how lonely I was.
It's okay.
My relationship with God was the thing I knew I was going to have to be really strong, and like I knew from before I even moved that it was going to be difficult and that I was going to have to really work to keep him in my life, because I still have my mum because I FaceTime her every single day, but I didn't have the people who'd known me my whole life and knew my story to remind me of all the things that God had done for me. And so it really took me making sure I was going to church every week and actually participating and putting myself out there, which was the last thing I wanted to do, to actually keep in my life. And so it's actually not until this year that I even feel like I'm actually stable in Christchurch, which is great. But I didn't think it was going to take so long. Yeah. Yeah.
But it's cool that your relationship with God helped you be strong enough to actually get through those moments.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people would relate to your story of moving to another place for tertiary education, and it's hard to move away from your family.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But you were going with someone that you knew. You were going with God, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, no, he's pretty cool.
So I was wondering, has God ever felt absent in your life?
I should probably say that he hasn't, but there's definitely been times where God has felt absent, or my relationship with God just wasn't at its strongest. Those times can feel so, I can't even pinpoint them. It was a lot of the time last year when I didn't have people around me to remind me, and I couldn't see any of my prayers being answered, which is funny because they all were answered this year. And now I'm really overwhelmed by all of the blessings that he's put on me.
Wait, sorry, quick question. What were those prayers?
So number one was, I guess the loneliness was very hard. I went from having like every single day I would hang out with someone to it just being me in my room, and then like a couple of days I'd hang out with my boyfriend, but that was like it. Didn't have any other friends. Yeah. Whereas, and so this year I have been lucky enough to meet you, Apova, and all of the girls in your flat and my flat. that really just, I was like, oh my goodness, Jesus, you have answered my prayer in the exact way that I wanted it to be answered. And I didn't know that it was going to be in the form of actual neighbours. I was willing to put in the hard work to drive to people's houses, but I was lucky enough that it was right next door, was where the people were. And like, you girls were all women who were struggling just as much as I was. I don't think I ever really realised that my problems were not universal, but
common.
That I'm still struggling with stuff I was struggling with when I was younger, and so are all of we.
Yeah.
And then the other one was involvement in church, was something I really, really wanted. Obviously to develop my relationship with God, but also I have always been a part of church, and it didn't sit right to not be involved. And so the end of last year, I got asked just randomly to come along to a Wednesday night youth group at church to kind of be a test trial of whether or not I wanted to be a leader. And that very first night, I just felt so, it was like, I mean, it was awkward, a little bit awkward, but I was like, I feel like this is where I need to be. And now this year, I've been consistent with it. And it's been one of the most rewarding things out of my year. And even though it can be tiring having to be there early on a Wednesday afternoon, it is so rewarding, so rewarding. It's really great to be able to connect with young people. I'm only 19, but to connect with girls who actually remind me a lot of my little sisters. So it's actually kind of filled that family gap for me.
Really cool.
The part that missed hanging out with, just having fun, silly conversations with 15-year-old girls.
Yeah.
Who were all amazing. It really also makes me think a lot about my journey with God, and reminds me how far I've actually come. Yeah. Even in those times where I feel like I'm absolutely hopeless and failing. It's like, actually, no, Sophie, you have grown so much as a person.
And I feel like you actually have, in the conversations that we've had, I feel like there's so much wisdom that you offer. So I feel like you don't need to feel like you're not far in your journey at all.
Oh, thanks for it.
No, all good. And yeah, I totally relate to that feeling of, it's so cool to be able to help people that were in your position.
For sure.
Awesome. It's awesome. We're almost coming to the end of the episode, but I guess my last questions for you, one of them is, has God ever surprised you?
Yes, he definitely has, and it has been very recently. He's been surprising me, and it's kind of about what we were talking about earlier with the answering of prayers being in the form of people, and like, I thought it was going to take way longer. I didn't think that God would answer my prayer so early. And I remember praying over the summer holidays. I went home for 3 months over uni break, which I was really worried about, because I was like, oh no, I'm going to be so disjointed when I come back. But literally the first night that we had that I moved into the flats, we had our wee meeting of both flats. And I was just like, oh my goodness, Jesus. I was so worried about being a first-time flatter. I cannot cook to save my life. But I was so worried about rejoining my life in Christchurch. It was such an easy transition. And now I'm seeing like every single day where he has answered the prayers I prayed in desperation last year. And it's very overwhelming, because now I'm so busy. So I have so much Jesus stuff in my life. So many conversations are happening. I'm always reflecting back on myself. But it's like so much better than where I was like 6 months ago.
Well, that's super encouraging to hear, because I think we all have desperate prayers that we pray all the time. And sometimes it feels like God's just never going to answer them. And sometimes he doesn't answer them the way we want to, but sometimes he does.
Yeah, and it's crazy when he answers them in the exact way that you wanted them.
Yeah, and it just shows us how good God is and everything. So we are at the end of the episode.
So sad.
It is quite sad, because I feel like you have so much more to share, but next time. I was wondering if you'd like to introduce a song to finish the episode and tell us why you picked it.
Yes. The song I'd like to pick today is The Goodness of God by Bethel Music. This song has stuck with me for like ever since the album came out. The lyrics are just all about how consistent and faithful he is and how he gives us goodness every single day. One of my favorite bits is at the end where it says, "Your goodness is running after me." And I think that no statement could be more true. God has been good to me throughout every part of my faith journey, from when I moved as a 10-year-old girl to Nelson and I had no friends. He was good to me. He provided me with people. And it's crazy to just see the little string of goodness he's led throughout my whole life. The song always makes me cry when we sing it at church, because I think that is the thing that I've learned most about God, is that he is good, and he's good in every season and in every moment. Yeah, so
oh my goodness,
that is the song. I'm gonna get emotional if I talk about it more, but yeah.
No, I love that. What a great way to finish the episode. The picture of God's goodness running after you.
Yeah,
that is so incredible. Well, thank you so much, Sophie, for joining us in this podcast. It's been a pleasure talking to you and hearing your story. And yeah, thank you guys for listening in, and we hope you enjoy the song.
I love you, Lord. Oh, your mercy never fails me. And all my days I've been held in your hand. From the moment that I wake up until I lay my head, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. 'Cause all my life you have been faithful, and all my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. I love your voice. You will lead me through the fire, and in darkest night you were close like no other. I've known you as a father, I've known you as a friend, and I have lived in the goodness of God, yeah. And all my life you have been faithful. Oh, and all my life you have goodness of God. I'm gonna sing, I'm gonna sing. Oh gosh, 'cause all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I inhale, oh, I'm gonna sing of the goodness of God. Oh, I'm gonna sing of the goodness of God. With every breath, over all my days.
Thank you for listening. Tune into our episodes every other Sunday at 12:30 p.m. on Plains FM 96.9. Otherwise, catch us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Remember to stay in touch on our Facebook page at God is Not Absent. See you guys later in our next episode.